Hi everyone! Welcome back to True Crime and Wine. Hope you have your wine glasses poured, your popcorn ready, your throw blanket wrapped around you, cuddly and warm, your lights on, don't be in the dark, and you're ready for this week's True Crime and Wine. It isn't Halloween if there isn't a homicidal maniac running around in a mask costume, right? Like Michael Myers, Jason, like those psychopaths. Well, it's right for Doreen Erbert, who was killed by a man wearing a wolf mask in San Jose, California on Halloween in 1984. At around 9:30 p.m. on Halloween, 911 dispatchers received a frantic phone call that there was a possible stabbing at a home in San Jose, California. The person on the phone was Charles Erbert, the husband of Doreen. He was frantically screaming, "My wife, my wife, my wife, my wife." He said his wife was laying in a pool of blood and she was 8 months pregnant. First responders arrived at the home moments later. When they walked inside of this house, they witnessed a gruesome crime scene. Doreen had about 25 blows to the head. Her hands was completely severed off. There was about an inch of blood on the floor. Whoever murdered her did complete and utter overkill. Her husband Charles was covered in her blood, screaming, hysterical, crying, inconsolable, kind of like not speaking English, just talking gibberish, in complete and utter shock. Before Doreen grew up and got married, she was formerly known as Doreen Ray Hitchens. She was born on November 29th, 1952 in Santa Clara, California. She had a brother and a sister and came from a very loving home. All signs pointed to a normal, good childhood. Her family, her friends, her relatives referred to her as a good, kind, gentle human being. And because of those characteristics, she got a job working in a field that allowed her to help other people. She became a physical therapist at a hospital in San Jose, California. Before Doreen married Charles, who was a man that found his wife laying in a pool of blood, she actually had met and married William Michael Dennis, who went by Michael or Mike. Mike was partially deaf in one ear. He always had to wear a hearing aid, and I guess back in the day hearing aids weren't as low-key as they are now. He had to carry around the big pack that went in your pocket. He also had a stutter and he was socially awkward. He wasn't the guy that was at the party popping all the jokes. He was the guy at the party that was kind of standing in the corner by himself. Michael was a sprayer at a factory. Don't know what the sprayer is, but that was his job title. Him and Doreen met through mutual friends and were set up on a blind date. On their blind date, they hit it off rather quickly. Mike thought, oh my god, like, I love her, I found the one, this is the woman of my dreams. And she had, you know, the little butterflies, goosebumps, whatever, when they met. After about 7 to 8 months, Mike asked Doreen to marry him and she said yes. They got married. In April of 1976, Doreen and Mike welcomed a baby boy into the world named Paul Dennis. Mike was in complete awe of his son, completely infatuated, in love, thought the world of his son. His son was everything to him. The new couple had a lot of stress, especially being new parents. But this stress wasn't the stress that a couple survives, because they didn't survive it. In 1977, a year later, a year after their son was born, the couple got divorced. Doreen got primary custody of their son Paul, and Mike got to see him on the weekends, which left Mike feeling bitter and angry because he cherished and absolutely adored his son and wished that he could spend more time with him, but she did get primary custody. When I was reading about this case, I didn't find out, and there wasn't much about why she got primary custody, so I can't tell you why they didn't have split custody or joint custody. I couldn't find that answer anywhere. I just know that that's what she got, primary custody. So while Mike was bitter about a divorce and mad about not seeing his son as much as he wanted, Doreen bounced back pretty quickly. She got a flat tire, she was broken down on the side of the road, and this local carpet store owner, Charles Erbert, sees her and says, let me stop. Also sounds like the beginning of a true crime story, but in this case, it was the beginning of a love story. He pulls over, he helps her with the flat tire, they exchange numbers, and it pretty much was a wrap after that. They started dating, they fell in love, they got engaged, they got married. In November of 1979, Charles and Doreen had a baby girl together, and they named her Deanna. They were raising Paul and Deanna together as a blended family. On February 17, 1980, tragedy struck the family. They had a swimming pool, but the swimming pool was gated with a fence. They had a dog, and the dog dug a hole in the fence that was large enough for Paul, who was 4 years old at the time, to crawl under the fence. So Paul gets through, he gets to the pool, he falls into the pool, and he basically drowns. Doreen was home, but by the time she noticed what had happened, it was far too late. Paul gets rushed to the hospital. He's put on life support for a whole week, and after that week passed, they took him off life support and he died 3 days later. I don't know about y'all, but like, I don't know how any parent ever gets over losing their child by drowning, especially if they were home. I mean, every person wants a pool in their house, but if I ever had kids, I prefer if I didn't have a pool, and if I did have a pool, it was like blocked by like the cement tall ass wall, and like you needed a passcode to get in. No dog could even like trot. Like, that's the type of fence I would need around a pool if I had children. And for me to have that type of fence, I would really need to be marrying or dating a billionaire, because that shit don't come cheap. Fort Knox around a swimming pool in the house I'm raising with our children, it's not gonna be cheap, my love, okay? Well, we're not gonna have no accidents like my kid drowning in the pool at age 4. So I can't imagine what it's like for a parent to lose their child to that type of tragedy. I just can't. Like, replaying what I could have done, what I should have done, but I didn't do. Like, how do you ever get over that? Now, Paul's death was devastating for the entire family. Even for Charles, who was not his biological father. His sister was too young to understand what was going on. And for his mom, Doreen. But for his biological dad, Mike, he was inconsolable. Paul was his world. It was everything he lived for. And now his son is gone by a tragic accident. Now, in his mind, Mike was convinced that Doreen took part in murdering his son. That life would be easier if they didn't have to deal with Mike, and what brought her and Mike together was their son. So in his mind, he convinced himself, well, if they got rid of my son, they get rid of me. And he was very convinced that it was murder and not an accident, and that his wife was fully guilty and fully to blame. So he takes them to court. He sues them for wrongful death, and for 2 years they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and finally, after 2 years, they had a trial in March of 1982, and the judge actually sided with Charles and Doreen, saying that the death was indeed an accident. So Mike lost again. He lost his marriage, he lost his son, and now he lost in court. The following 2 years, Mike's mental health just completely deteriorated. He lost his job, he had nothing going for him, he had nothing to live for. He was angry, he was mad, he was broken, he was lost, and he was pissed. And he was consumed with fucking grief. Full of anger, full of rage, full of bitterness, with a little cherry of grief on top. Sounds like a recipe for motherfucking disaster to me. 4 years after her son's death, and after multiple miscarriages, Charles and Doreen finally had something to celebrate, because she was pregnant, and she was pregnant with a baby boy. Their son was due in early November, right after Halloween. But on October 31st, 1984, tragedy would strike, and both Doreen and her unborn child would not make it to November. Doreen took her 4-year-old daughter Deanna out trick-or-treating. Charles stayed home, he handed out candy to trick-or-treaters, and when Doreen and Deanna returned home, Charles headed out to buy more candy for trick-or-treaters and to grab some liquor at the liquor store. He recalls being gone for about 15 minutes. When Charles came home, he noticed that the front door was slightly opened. When he opened the door, he saw what would be one of the most gruesome, disturbing crime scenes that San Jose has ever had. His wife Doreen laid in a pool of blood in the entranceway of their home. The fetus of their 8-month-old baby boy was in the living room. Doreen was struck in the head multiple times. The fetus of their child was brought into the living room and cut and hacked into tiny little pieces. One of Doreen's hands was completely severed off. When Charles called 911, dispatchers recall him saying that he was trying desperately to put his wife back together. When he had gotten home, there was so much blood he actually fell into it. So he was covered in his wife's blood when paramedics arrived. And despite how much injuries and how many fatal wounds Doreen received, she still had a pulse when paramedics arrived. So they put her in the ambulance and they rush her there to try to save her life. Now in the meantime at the house, Charles is hysterical, he's crying, he's inconsolable, he's destroyed, he's wrecked, he's screaming, my wife, help my wife, help my wife. But he's covered in her blood. And when you're an officer, the first people you look at in a murder are the people closest to that person. And the person closest to her was her husband, who was covered in her blood. So they detain him, They put him in the back of the cop car. He's kicking and he's screaming in the back of the cop car, and they bring him to the police station. Right now, he's looking guilty. He's looking like the #1 suspect. Cops go into the house and they take a look around to see if anybody else might be there. As they're walking around the house, they find 4-year-old Deanna, their daughter, hiding behind the couch. Deanna would later tell authorities that she remembers sitting on the couch watching a movie with her mother, and there was a loud knock on the door. It wasn't a normal knock, it was an aggressive knock. Her mom picked up a bowl of candy because she thought it was trick-or-treaters and headed to open the door. When she opened the door, she remembers a man yelling, "I'm going to kill you." Her mother yells to her to hide. Go hide, hide. So she told them that she hid behind the couch, and she didn't leave. Even when her mom stopped screaming and stopped yelling, she just stayed behind the couch. She didn't leave. She then tells them that she heard the man walking around in circles, searching for her. And had he found her, he probably would have killed her too. But he didn't. So cops found Deanna hiding behind the couch, and thankfully and luckily still alive. When cops made the house a crime scene, they remember walking in the entryway. There was nothing but a stool with a carved pumpkin on the stool that was lit up by a candle. One of the detectives recalls the scene being eerie and bizarre. She was killed right there in the entryway, and they didn't know what the murder weapon was at the time, but they assumed that it was a machete because of the blood splatter pattern that was on the wall, the floor, the ceiling, and the surrounding furniture. By the front door, they found a wolf mask, a Halloween costume mask that had bulging eyes, exaggerated teeth, and a tongue that stuck out. They bagged it as evidence because they thought, maybe the murderer was wearing this mask to hide his identity when he arrived at the house. An hour after Doreen got rushed to the hospital, cops on the scene received a phone call that she died. So this was now a homicide. They knew by the nature of the killing and how this person had killed this woman that it wasn't random. It wasn't a stranger from the streets. It wasn't a robbery. This was someone that the victim knew on a personal level because they were full of rage. At the police station, Charles was being held as a suspect. They were holding him under suspicion and interrogating him and questioning him for hours. They were convinced that they already had the murderer. Little did they know, they didn't. Her husband Charles remembers being in the interrogation room being questioned by cops for hours upon hours when one of the cops came in and informed him that his wife had passed away. He was hysterical, he was crying, he asked the cop for a hug, and the cop said no. Now, I can't imagine that I just lost my wife or someone I love, and I asked them for a hug because I don't even know what to do with myself in that moment because I just lost not one person, but my unborn child too, and the cop just said, no, I'm not gonna hug you. One, probably because it might be against protocol, and two, probably because they thought he was guilty. Whatever the case may have you, I know I probably couldn't be a cop if I had to do that. Unless I thought the motherfucker was guilty, then I'm like, skirt, I ain't hugging you, motherfucker. So that's probably how that cop felt. Cops found a trail of blood outside of the home that went down the block, down the street, and then it suddenly just stopped. It's as if the person who committed the murder had gotten into a car and drove away. So cops start investigating and questioning neighbors to see if anyone saw anything. A lot of people didn't, but then one witness came forward and said around 6:37 p.m. he noticed a man wearing a wolf mask standing across the street from Doreen's home, just standing there, staring at the home. Now, he wasn't participating in all the Halloween activities like everybody else. He was just standing there, alone, awkward, staring at their home. Now, if I was that neighbor, I think I probably would have called the cops like, hey, there's a creepy motherfucker with no kids wearing a mask standing on my street like a psychopath. Can somebody like roll up and like do a wellness check? I don't know, but like there's kids out here. But nobody fucking did that. And maybe if they had, tragedy wouldn't have happened. But it's the 80s. I don't know. People just thought differently. It's weird. Every true crime that happened before the 2000s, I'm like, this shit is weird. And even in the 2000s, shit can be weird. But I just know if I'm a nosy ass neighbor, which I would be if I lived in a quiet neighborhood, if I saw a man wearing a goddamn mask staring at somebody's home with no kids that were trick-or-treating, I'm calling the motherfucking cops. Bring, bring, hi. Yeah, it's me. Yeah, there's a man with no children wearing a mask standing on my street. He's been here for about an hour. I'm gonna need someone to come get him because I'm freaked the fuck out. I was like, what? I'm so confused. I'm so confused. Neighbors start telling the cops about Doreen's ex, Mike Dennis, who she had a child with, and they lost their child tragically in a drowning. So they get Mike's information, and some of the cops were like, hey, we're gonna head to this address, we're gonna check the scene out, we're just gonna figure out what's going on. Keep in mind, it's still Halloween night. These cops are like moving, and they're moving quickly. So a couple of them, they head over to Mike's home. They pull out their flashlight because it's nighttime, and they roll up to his car. They put the flashlight in the car, and they notice blood on the steering wheel, on the keyhole, and on the shift gear. And they're like, this isn't looking good. So they knock on the door, there's no answer. So then one of the cops does a little walk around the house. The lights are on and water is running. So the cops look at each other, and they're all in agreement that whatever's going on is probably someone trying to get rid of evidence. So they knock on the door again. Mike finally answers. He's wearing a bathrobe and his hands are in his pockets. They inform him that they're investigating the murder of his ex-wife, Doreen. He's completely unfazed, he's unbothered, he's just like, oh, okay. Then Mike invites the cops in. So they go in. Cops on the scene ask him if he'll sign a consent form for them to search his home. He said, yeah, of course I'll sign one. I have nothing to hide. So he takes his hands out of his pockets, and he actually has to sign the consent form with his left hand because his right hand was wrapped in bandages because he had a cut. So the officer's like, what happened to your hand, sir? And he's like, oh, I was playing with a knife. I threw it in the air and I caught it with the blade instead of the handle. And the cop's like, So they start looking around Mike's place. They found drops of blood on the kitchen floor and drops of blood on the grass outside of his house. They found bloody clothes in his bedroom and bloody gauze in his bathroom. Cops know that this is way too much blood. This is way too much blood. He did not cut himself playing around with the knife. This blood is from something else. He didn't receive this from playing by himself with knives in his kitchen. They arrest him. When Mike goes to the police station and he's put into an interrogation room, they start questioning him and questioning him and questioning him. And at first, Mike denies everything. He denies killing his wife. He's like, I didn't do it. He said, I've been home since 4 p.m. I had dinner with my mother. Then I handed out candy to trick-or-treaters. I didn't kill my wife. And despite their suspicions, at this very moment, they had no hard evidence that linked him to the murder of his ex-wife and her child. In California, they have a law that a person can only be held for 48 hours before being released. They conduct a second, more thorough search of Mike's home. Police find a receipt from a hardware store. They found a label from an 18-inch machete. And the most disturbing and weird and creepy part is in Mike's garage. He had 2 homemade coffins. One was taller than the other. He had weights to hold down body bags, and he also had body bags in his garage. On top of all that creepy shit, he had a map of the San Francisco Bay. It would later come to light that Mike's plan was to get Charles, Doreen, and Deanna, their daughter, somehow to his house. He was going to kidnap them, whatever, get them into his garage, put Charles in the larger coffin and Deanna and Doreen in the smaller coffin. He was going to dump the coffins into the San Francisco Bay and have them drown the same way that his son Paul did. The plan didn't work out, so he went to plan B. Even though all the evidence they found in the garage was fucked up and pointed to, hey, I definitely killed them, it wasn't sufficient enough for Mike to continue being held. So after 48 hours, Mike was released from jail. However, Mike was arrested again on November 5th, 1984 after his blood type was matched to blood that was found at the crime scene. Keep in mind, this is in the 80s and this was before DNA testing. Mike was charged with murder with special circumstances, which made him eligible for the death penalty. Cops found a little black book full of phone numbers from women in Mike's home. So cops just start calling all the women in Mike's little black book. One of the women answers and she starts talking to the cops about Mike. And she says that the previous year on Halloween, her and Mike went to a Halloween party. He was a big bad wolf and wore a mask. And the cop was like, well shit, do you just happen to have any pictures of him wearing that mask? And she said, yeah, the guy took tons of pictures. So they got a picture of Mike wearing the wolf mask mask that was found at the scene of the crime, which linked Mike not only by DNA, but by his mask. In July of 1988, Mike went to trial. Initially, he pleaded not guilty, but then he changed his plea to guilty by reason of insanity. He eventually gets found guilty for first-degree murder of his ex-wife Doreen and second-degree murder of her unborn child. Psychologists that handled this case believe that seeing trick-or-treaters on Halloween triggered Mike because he imagined his son Paul and taking him trick-or-treating, and he just snapped and he went to his ex-wife's house with a mask on and killed her and her unborn child, and would have killed Charles and Deanna too had they been there. In September of 1999, he was sentenced to be killed by the gas chamber. When he was leaving the courtroom, he whispered goodnight to Doreen's family and relatives like a real fucking psychopath. Yeah, motherfucker, goodnight. Go to sleep in the gas chamber, bitch. You psychotic motherfucker. You wanna be Michael Myers having ass? Fuck you, Michael Dennis. You ain't no Michael Myers. Piece of shit ass motherfucker. Die slow in that gas chamber. Like most people that get sentenced to death, he's just sitting on death row in San Quentin, awaiting to be killed in the gas chamber, if and when that ever happens. And Charles, her husband that witnessed and got accused initially for her murder, suffered his whole life with drinking. He tried to drown out his pain and his life just never got normal. And her daughter probably has some psychological problems, but I didn't really find much about her online. But the whole thing is just really not okay. It's so disturbing and sad and a terrible, terrible way to die. And you just never know who you're falling in love with. You just never know. Like, you could literally lay next to someone or spend time with someone and just not even know what the fuck they're capable of, and that's the scariest thing of all. And that's why I don't like Halloween. People dressed up, hiding themselves. Like, fuck that shit, dude. I'm good. Halloween party my ass. I'm good. I'm staying home. Y'all have fun. I'll be watching these scary movies, and when I hear some shit went down at the party, like, I'm gonna be so glad I stayed home. Anyways, this is this week's True Crime and Wine. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you can sleep tonight because the story was really fucked up. But give this video a thumbs up or a thumbs down. But as I always say, if you're giving it a thumbs down, you probably shouldn't be on this channel. But if you are going to be here, hit that subscribe button. And also hit the subscribe button on our wave. Link is in the description box. A new video every day has gone out for Vlogmas and will continue to go out on our wave. All my social media is in the description box below as well. And I love you guys to the moon and back. Be safe, be smart, fuck Halloween, and anyone like Michael Dennis and Michael Myers and anyone who wears a mask.